What is up, guys? Today we'll be breaking down chapter 228 of My Hero Academia. Now, this week's chapter was an interesting one in regards to the fact that it opens up with ice climbers, coming out the cut, approaching Dabi. Dabi comments that he's made progress in his strength, and because of that, he can tell that the ice climbers is also a formidable foe. The thing that is fascinating about this is that instantly ice climbers ask him, "You are the only one with AoE. Why have you not launched your flames off? And if not, maybe you have a problem with your quirk," seeing as, yes, it is rational that Dabi would be immediately just burn everyone to a crisp if he had a quirk that he had strong control over, precision with. And I think that this is highlighted by the fact that Dabi kind of hits him with the typical sound effect that characters make when they're upset or a little angry or annoyed that they're being called out on something. And he instantly goes and throws out a giant torrent of flames spanning multiple city blocks. You can tell that it's going around buildings, it's spreading, it's going everywhere, and it's actually a giant whoosh. And I think that's a fascinating take because, one, it ties in with the theory that Dabi is Toya, which means to shoot. And if you notice that Dabi always kind of just shoots off his flames and pulls away, but he doesn't do long continuous bursts like Endeavor does. He doesn't just have the flame sitting on his body casually all the time in the same way that Shoto does. Instead, he usually blasts it away and just lets it go. And so I think that's kind of a hint towards the fact that his quirk and his flames do burn him, do damage him, and he's trying to masterfully control it, but at the same time it's just a high caliber flame with a body that's not compatible with the firepower. That being said, Ice Climbers tells him that his flames or his campfire won't be able to melt his ice, as he pulls all the ice at least within several blocks of him to form a giant dragon made of it. And he reveals that he did not go to school. He spent his entire time honing and practicing his quirk, and that the Supreme Leader gave him the opportunity to do that, to which Dabi replies, "It seems like you've had an interesting life, or led an interesting life. That's how sad," like he says, it's like sad that he spent so much time working on his quirk, spending so much time like focused around quirk training. And I think that ties in also with the potential of Dabi being Toya and having been under Endeavor, having to spend so much time focusing on training his quirk just for his father's sake. So in the same way, he could actually find him like pitiable, because he was conditioned to train his quirk just for the benefit of another person and never gained the autonomy and the independence to realize that he doesn't have to train his quirk just to meet the ends and the ambitions of someone else, in the same way that Toya, if this is who Dabi is, was being trained to use his quirk for essentially the benefit of Endeavor, who simply wanted him to surpass All Might as a de facto a proxy him, proving that he's better because his offspring can surpass All Might, even though, as Deku called him out for during the sports festival, your kids aren't you, therefore their success is their own, not inherently yours. Now, the thing about this is that, because of the size and the scale of the attacks here, there's definitely blowback. You actually can see, kind of some explosions. It's a lot clearer in the viz, where you can kind of see there's this, gust of wind coming off, very reminiscent of the sports festival explosion, that you see people kind of running away, kind of getting launched a little. So they're definitely harming fodder. They're definitely taking out some bystanders, even though there aren't really a lot of bystanders within this context of the war. And the fact that they're causing a lot of public damage, I think, is fascinating. And it also leads to a situation where it's not like these buildings are just going to stop burning. Once they're catching on fire, once these cars catch on fire, if these vehicles around, these are all different things that can lead to chain reactions within the city. You could have some cars start blowing up, leading to just in general more property damage and the city catching on fire and burning. But you also have the potential of flooding if Dabi manages to actually melt this guy's ice, even though he says that Dabi's flames can't, which means either he can control his ice to a certain degree, or as it's melting, refreeze it, or he's just that confident that there's a gap in their power level. The second one seems a little irrational, just because at the end of the day, flames do melt ice. So I would hope that there was a little more to his quirk than just manipulating the shape of ice, if that was going to be the stance and the way he was going to talk about it. You do have, it could also be a nod to Bleach, where after Toshiro lost his Bankai, he actually created vacuum walls, in which a layer of ice could be melted away, but you couldn't actually chip away at all of this ice right away until Basby turned up the heat even further. So it could be that we might actually see the ice being a problem and Dabi having to risk it and take some self-damage in order to properly channel like flames of a higher degree, a higher focus fire, in order to penetrate his defenses and burn through that and take him down. That aside, we transition to Compress, who is telling Dabi to, you know, pay attention to his surroundings, like be a bit more careful, trying not to get caught in the damage because they're supposed to be allies. And Compress is the only person who seems to be like doing, you know, battlefield evaluation, checking the stakes, making sure that everyone is where they need to be. He's talking about how they need to regroup because they've been separated, but he does note that Shigaraki and Spinner should still be paired together. He notes that the location of Dabi, and then he realizes that Twice is gone. And he says that like they lost Toga in the beginning because Toga was just gonna go ahead and stealth and go get Giran back. Obviously that plan did not work as she ended up fighting Chitose, but that was her idea. They didn't have proper teamwork in that setting, which is fascinating because I think Dabi, Shigaraki, Spinner, and Compress have shown teamwork before, and specifically Toga and Twice have worked together. But the idea of the 6 of them having to take on like this entire organized army and splitting up just into chaos, while it makes sense just due to the fact that it's a chaotic battlefield, it is interesting that it's almost like a slight regression in the balancing of the teamwork. But I think it's just the terms and the conditions of the battle that cause this to unfold. So we cut away to Twice, who's actually managed to track down Toga. He finds her in the shed of Mr. Ikeda, as it's confirmed by Skeptic, who is the Gorillas guy. His name, I know it, but I don't trust myself not to butcher it, so I'm not going to do that. Sorry. Feel Good Ink guy. That's what I'm sticking with it. Mr. Gorillas, whose quirk gets revealed this chapter. And it's called Anthropomorphize, and he is capable of turning refrigerators and other human-sized objects into puppets that he can manipulate at will. The thing that is fascinating is that the puppets don't inherently look like Twice right away, but once they close in on him, they all have his face, harkening back to the trauma from Twice's past when he accidentally ended up tying himself to a chair by his clones, and they fought it out for 9 days, damaging his psyche permanently. The thing that I find interesting is that I either just didn't notice it, or Horikoshi upped the graphicness of the art from previous times, because there was an arm just flying through the air. So Twice's clones really went at it. Like, they really made it a point to tear each other apart piece by piece, and that's kind of a disturbing thing to see. Like, that level of watching yourself literally rip limbs off of your own body would mess up anyone's mind. And it kind of further explains why he broke in the way he did. There's the lovely panel, or the page, where you have half of Twice's face as he's turning around to see the puppets. Then you see all of them as Twice with his face, and then his eyes are widened and split in two. The art is just like done very well. And then you have Skeptic says, you are a man who lived properly. You try to liberate yourself and live your life to the fullest, only for it to lead you to a wounded soul. But if we were to gather you and gain you and pull you into the Liberation Army, we would have you be able to make any copy of Redestro we would need should the worst happen. So the idea for Skeptic is to grab Twice, convert him, and have him be essentially responsible for generating clones of any of them should any of them fall, so that they can continue on the path that they have set for themselves in being the Meta Liberation Army, making sure that they never appear to lose. And that's a very smart take. It's a very good idea as far as making sure that you can always maintain the image of success. It's very important, like in the same way that even businesses, for example, if they don't sell product, they just throw it away because they don't want to admit that it's necessarily a loss. So they'd rather throw it away than give it out and just say, okay, we couldn't sell this. And so it's and that's the kind of things that influence, like, stock prices. It's just the idea of, do we think this is valuable or not? It doesn't matter if it's real, if people believe it is, when you just need them to do something for you or your desires. So that's where his mindset is on Twice and Twice's capabilities and what he can bring to the Meta Liberation Army if they successfully manage to draft him into it. And they pull off Twice's mask, which we know is extremely a big deal for him. It's how he manages to cope with his trauma and how he manages to not cave in completely to his PTSD, which should be in full swing right now due to just seeing a bunch of doppelgangers of himself, taking him back to the 9 days. However, there's something interesting about Twice's psyche that I want to talk about. Twice might not be twice, but rather thrice. And what I mean by that is this. Usually there's two color bubbles. There's the bubbles that Twice says, and then there's the, when he repeats himself or like argues with himself a different way. But in this chapter, especially like in the Viz, there's this standard white and black bubble, and there's like the inverted like gray with like the lighter text. And they're going back and forth, like, oh, she's so cold, it's burning my hand. And that seems like the normal, like, crazy person jargon. And a lot of people chalk it up to schizophrenia. But then, before Twice, like when Twice starts to make his decision to, like, go kill them, the bubble is just completely dark and black. And he goes, the girl is dead. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that Toga is dead, because Skeptic doesn't believe that she's dead and says that she has to die for the sake of Curious. But what this does mean, or could mean, is that there was a third voice chiming in. A third person speaking and wanting Twice to think of her as dead. If that's the case, all three of them seem to care about Toga, though. If those are like three different personalities, for example. Let's just say this is multiple personality disorder because he splintered himself into multiple ways. Also, he always talks about splitting into becoming two completely different people or something like that. This could be where when his mask is removed, his personality fractures and he actually starts to function as a different person and a different personality takes over. This is actually kind of reminiscent of Air Gear, where there was Agito and Akito Wanijama, but then there was also Lind Wanijama, who was deeper within the psyche and only came out in more serious circumstances. For example, when they fought Orca, Lind comes out, and that's the first time you see the Grand Fang Cage, which is the infinity atmosphere of that ability. And check out Air Gear. I'll just say that. But the important thing here is that in that story, the third personality was the most powerful. Now, Twice, the main Twice that we see all the time, the dominant personality, always says, I don't clone myself. I do not clone myself. But faced with this condition of seeing all of these hymns coming at him, if this is a third personality or a third angle or take, then there's a chance that that one could come to the front. And from this perspective, that one could possibly have zero qualms about cloning himself. If that were to happen, you could end up with a repeat of Twice's worst moment, but for the best reason. The League gave him a place to stay. The League gave him a home. He cares about his friends. This is established multiple times throughout the arc that he is the shonen protagonist of My Hero Academia. He is the one that's focused on friendship. He's the one that believes the most in like that power, that unity, the importance of home and having a place to be in a community. If that Twice were to set aside his own fears, or if Twice in general, like this isn't multiple personality, just schizophrenia out the wazoo, and he decides to set aside his own personal fears and traumas for a moment to use his ability to create multiple hymns, they wouldn't want to fight over who's the original in this scenario. All of the clones, regardless of how they feel about being the original or anything else like that, would want to keep Toga safe. So this would lead to a Twice versus Twice bonanza, where there's twice as many Twices as you could possibly fathom there being. Yeah, complicated. It's basically Twice. It's thrice. Like that's I don't know how else to put it. So the idea that these clones could potentially come out, make more clones, and then you could have a Twice on Twice war while the main Twice is running away with Toga is fascinating to me, because it would be him overcoming his pain. See, we've seen, like, people thought of, like, Shigaraki's quirk is evolving. I don't necessarily agree with that line of thought. People saw, like, a gain in Toga, and that she finally was able to use Ochako's quirk, and she said herself that she had observed Ochako and she had been watching her, so that's how she figured out how to use it. And in this case, each character has either overcome a hurdle or been affected in some way where we've seen them display themselves in a new light. Every character has shown themselves in a new light, not necessarily evolve their quirk, because, you know, Toga directly stated she didn't evolve her quirk. She studied for it. I mentioned in my previous chapter breakdown that I feel like Shigaraki might have always been able to cause that level of destruction, and that he's been secretly repressing himself, and that it was the decay of his sanity that led to, or his repression barriers, and, you know, the overall like intent to not do harm that he had as a child that might still be a part of him subconsciously that was limiting his quirk. If that's the case, then the psychological barrier for Twice being broken through and overcome is him advancing as a villain, which makes sense for this arc. This arc is about the villains coming into their own, establishing themselves as a force, and a perfect way for that to happen is for Twice to beat his own PTSD, use his quirk in a way that he told himself he would never do so again, just to save a friend. That fits the theme of what his narrative seems to be in this arc, the sheer willpower and dedication to not only Toga but the League itself. And I think of the people in the League, he's one of the most loyal, not necessarily because he believes in the goals or ambitions of Shigaraki, but because he believes in having a community, and the League is his family. He even has the handkerchief from all the way back during that overhaul arc where his mask got ripped, and so she, you know, Toga puts it back on him, and he even tries to use it to like wipe away her blood, which I think is important that he has keepsakes. There's always been like this friendship and his genuine attachment to Toga. He even jokingly or seriously, but we won't know for sure because Twice is nuts. There's just no other way to put it, because he's crazy. And so he asked her out, but then he goes, "You're too young." So there's just a lot to set up there with that potential. But one of the things I will say is that if Twice can create clones of people even after they're dead, based on what Skeptic seems to believe, then if the League gathers the corpses of all the big leaders of the MLA and they win, they can still make clones of the dead members of the Liberation Army. Now, imagine this. The League of Villains defeats the Meta Liberation Army. But what they do is they gather the corpses, and Twice clones the corpses. The Meta Liberation Army sees the originals dead, so now they know they will lose. They know that they've already lost. And from here, the Meta Liberation Army is forced essentially to consistently put out propaganda and do things in favor of the League. Give them the codes, give them the access to the footage, give them whatever they need to advance, because at the end of the day, they're clones anyway. And they said it themselves, the League of Villains and the Meta Liberation Army's goals are not that far apart. That means that they could eventually come to an understanding and a negotiation posthumously, where the Meta Liberation Army would use its resources to help the League willingly, because the closest thing to living they would have is existing as clones made by Twice. This way, the Meta Liberation Army don't fall this arc, even though they technically do. Instead, they are absorbed by the League of Villains, but used as a means to advance them while still getting to achieve their own ambitions. This could be a very interesting take, because it would essentially give the League a lot of power while still allowing them to essentially have proxies. The idea that they could their whole ambition is influencing society. So the idea of them being able to do that, possibly putting out more books focused around the League of Villains narratives or like their ambitions, the idea of propagating more of Stain's ideals is something that Spinner would like, the idea of being able to in general have access to their satellites, their technology, all these other things that they wouldn't have had before, because if they just kill everybody in the MLA, there's no reason for them. They might not necessarily be able to hack everything. Giron might not be that good with technology. That is a possibility. But by opening this door to the potential of Twice being able to create clones of the dead, we now have the ability set up within the story, within the context of the story, if what they say is true, for Twice to essentially be the MVP of the League of Villains by consistently maintaining the image that the Meta Liberation Army is functioning, giving them soldiers around the country, giving them access to publishing, giving them access to a political party, literally allowing the League of Villains manifestos to creep into the actual political the house of politics, allowing people to actually believe and start pushing policies that might be in favor of what the League of Villains' long-term goals are, allowing for them to essentially get access to the Detonarat tech, like full access to Detonarat, where they would be able to get a way better arm for compress. Ujiko would probably love being able to have access to Detonarat's technology and all these other things, so where even if Ujiko might not necessarily want to help them fight or necessarily want to be sworn to Shigaraki right now, I think even if he doesn't take down Gigantomachia, even if they drop Gigantomachia here and they've already taken down the MLA, Ujiko might just straight up be like, you know what you've done is way more impressive than necessarily just taming Gigantomachia. Though I do think that if this is the way it's going to go, they will clone the members of the Metal Liberation Army and force them to help them fight Gigantomachia. If Twice gets better at making clones, which he should be, I don't see why he wouldn't have gotten better at making sturdier and sturdier clones, especially if they've been fighting Gigantomachia for, these past 6 weeks. So where I think this is going is the Metal Liberation Army's leaders falling, Twice setting up clones as proxies for them, and them now gaining access, being basically front and center into the world, having full-blown access without having to give up their cover in any form, shape, or way. Where instead the Metal Liberation Army would literally be the puppets of the League, in the same way that Mr. Feelgood Inc. has his own puppets that he creates. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe if this is the kind of content you're after. I'm trying to bring out as high quality My Hero Academia analysis as I possibly can. And I think one of the things that I was thinking about doing is, if my channel gets big enough, every month I'll try to maybe send somebody who's like one of the subscribers a gift or something like that pertaining to My Hero Academia. So yeah, just let me know if you're enjoying the content. If you're not enjoying the content, tell me what you would like to see or what you would like me to do better, and I'll try to make that happen. So as always, you guys just have a great day. Anaki out.